Please be seated. So at my house, our house, I have a sort of a monthly ritual where Jill and I sit down and we do the bills, and I am constantly looking for that extra 50 or $100 that I could squeeze out of the expenses, you know what I mean? And it's been going on for so long, and there aren't very many places you can squeeze, you know? You gotta eat, and you gotta pay the utilities and so forth. But it's a lot of times it ends up around like cell phone bills and internet and television and like that. So recently I've been through this exercise again, and I changed everything from one provider to another provider. Like we had like television with one folks and internet with another, and then I put all with one person. Okay. And I won't tell you who, because who knows, I'll probably be back. And, you know, it doesn't matter. They're just a cycle. You go around and around. But I saved some money. I probably saved about $50. I'm super excited about that. So when I called the company I was with and told them I wasn't going to be with them any longer, they said, oh, and who have you gone to? And I told them that. And the young man said, well, I hope that if you are satisfied, you'll come back. He said, I just had 2 people in my community where he lived do this same thing and go to that same company, and they came back. And I said, oh, well, can you tell me what their complaint was, why they did that? He said, well, I don't want to say that, but I will say this. He said, just read the fine print. And I said, oh, well, that sounds ominous. Can you tell me more? What was it about? And he says, I won't say more, just read the fine print. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today, the fine print. And of course I didn't read the fine print. I just went ahead and made the change. And who knows, do you ever read the fine print? Anybody? No. Mobile contracts? No. Agreements with any website you go on? No. No. What is the fine print about, Ty? You're an attorney.
I don't read it.
He doesn't even read it. You assume if you don't like him anyway. It doesn't matter. Nobody reads the fine print. So this is what's going on in Galatians. So Paul has started this church in Galatia, which is this kind of area in Asia Minor, and several churches and so forth. So anyway, he's been there, and he started this church, and he's told them what it's like to be a Christian, how you follow Christ, how you become a Christ follower. And they're rocking along, doing that, everything's going great. Then what happens is somebody comes from Jerusalem. Somebody comes up and says, one or more people have come and said, listen, what did Paul say again? And they go, well, this is what Paul told us to do. He said, you just have to do this. And they said, that's not right. They said, there's actually more you have to do if you're going to follow Christ. And they said, and they're like, well, what is it? And they said, well, you have to be circumcised. And they went, what? What exactly is circumcision? And they told him, they're like, really? Because Paul said nothing about that. And they're like, for me, I think that is the definition of fine print. Isn't it? That should have been in the bold print. But Paul never said anything about it. Paul said, no way. And they came back, they're like, nope, you've got to be circumcised if you're going to follow Christ, see? Now, Paul goes through this exercise, and so Paul's writing this letter back to them, this letter to the Galatians, after he's heard about these people coming up there. He's like, they're wrong. I was right. They are wrong. You do not have to be circumcised in order to follow Christ. So Paul makes this point over and over and over in Galatians and in Romans and in Corinthians, and you get all this, but it's Paul's like big deal. It's his big deal. You don't have to do anything else in order to be a Christian. You don't have to follow, in other words, the law, which for Paul meant the Torah. And the big question for Paul is, see, Paul is not one of the original 12. We know that, right? Paul came later. The original 12, and then one died, and they replaced him. And then Paul is later, and he has this special revelation of Jesus visiting him and telling him what to do. Now, Paul's ministry then is not to the Hebrew Christ followers, the Jewish Christ followers. Paul's ministry is out to the Gentiles. So, if in order to be a Christ follower, for some, you have to have been a Jew and followed the Jewish law, or Torah, including circumcision and everything else, right? If that's the way they see it, but now you can be a Gentile and do this too? So in other words, the question is, the crux of it is, the mystery is, how can you be a Jew and a Gentile at the same time? Because they're two different categories, right? Something has to give if the Gentiles are going to be included. And for Paul, what has to give is the law. Paul says, forget the law if you're a Gentile. Don't worry about the law if you're a Gentile. Paul never says if you're a Jew, don't worry about the law. He's all about it. But if you're a Gentile, you don't have to. That's his big thing. Something has to give, and he says the law. So in Galatians 3, what we get today, this letter to the Galatians, we're in chapter 3. And he has this great point that he makes. And here's what it is. And this really comes down to the crux of this whole argument. If you look at Abraham, he says, does anybody here think, he's talking to them, does anybody here, he says, think that Abraham wasn't justified or righteous or saved? Abraham, the great patriarch, right? The first one that God called and said, Abraham, I'm going to have a covenant with you. Remember? I'm going to have a covenant with you, and we're going to do three things. I'm going to give you blessings so that you can bless the nations. I'm going to give you descendants, and I'm going to give you land. Remember? And what's Abraham supposed to do? Love God. Right? Just follow God. Be faithful to the covenant. Now, Paul says, does anybody here think Abraham wasn't justified or righteous or saved? And they all go, no, of course he's in. Right? God chose him. He's in. No worries. Now, then Paul says, well, wait a minute. Later comes Moses. And Moses brings the law. So are you saying that if you have to have the law in order to be justified, then how in the world is Abraham justified? When Abraham didn't have the law. See that move? Is that great? It's like brilliant, yeah? So he says, listen, therefore, clearly, he says, God values and honors faith over law. Paul says we had the law for a while because the law was our disciplinarian. The law kind of kept, what the law did was illuminate when we were wrong. It kept us in line until faith could be restored. And he says in Christ, faith now in Christ is the same as Abraham's faith. And faith is the thing you need, not law. Does that make sense? All that. Yeah. So for Paul, there is no fine print in the contract. Now, Paul was clear about that. But I'm not so sure that the church has always been clear about that. Wasn't long before the church started coming up with things that you had to do in order to be saved. Right? What about works? James writes in his great book that show me your faith. Your faith without works is dead. Show me your works, I'll show you my faith, he says. You can't just have faith, he says. You have to live out works. Catholic Church, any Catholics here? Former, current, future, right? Big thing, yeah? Big thing. Why? If all you need is faith, don't worry about it, Paul would say. The church immediately started to say, well, wait a minute. If you're really transformed by your faith, then wouldn't you live in different ways? Paul himself has a list he's going to come up with. We're going to get it next week about things that are things of the world and things that are things of the Spirit. So, here's my question. Do you think there is fine print? If the headline, if the bold print is, you are saved, do you think that our faith, Christianity, has fine print underneath? This is the interactive part. No! I gotta know. I gotta know. I know. Mostly no. I wonder. If you ask me, it seems to me that there is fine print. But it's not about what you have to do to be saved. Like, I think your salvation is secure. You're going to be surprised to see me in heaven, I know. But I'm not going to be surprised to see you. Right? We're going to get there. Salvation is clear. But I think the fine print is, I has to do with what you do after you have committed your life to Christ. Because if you have committed your life to Christ, do you go back to your old way of living? Or have you been in some way transformed so that you must live out a new way of being? Right? I think that there is fine print, but it has to do with what you do next. And here's what I want to tell you about that. Jesus Christ himself said it. That's good enough for me. Jesus Christ himself said, this is the first and great. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it. Jesus Christ said, the way to follow me, you don't need the law, you need one thing, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. How do you love God? How do you love God? This is also the interactive part, but you don't have to say it out loud. But I want you to ask yourself the question. I'm a Christian. I'm following the first and great commandment. How do I love God? Come to church? Okay. What else? Pray? Yeah. Be generous? Okay. How do you love God? With all your heart, mind, strength, and what's the other? Spirit. Soul. Yeah. You find them in two different places, and it's not, the list isn't always the same, but you have to love God with everything that you are. Yeah? How do you do that? Do you do it Monday morning at 8 o'clock? Do you do it Tuesday at 6? Do you do it Thursday and Wednesday when you go play golf with your buddies? How do you love God? With all of you. Okay. Fine print. This is subsection 2, small print, B-A. Here it is. Love your neighbor as yourself. Come on now. If you're going to be a Christian, you have to do this. You don't have to be circumcised. That's optional. Yeah? You don't have to worry about eating shellfish. Eat all you want. Yeah? But you got to love your neighbor. Here's my question. Who's your neighbor? Every one of us is going to go next door and take a pie. Every one of us is going to shovel that old widow's driveway. And we're going to feel good afterwards. Way to go. Man, you're a really good Christian. You shoveled your neighbor's driveway. Who else is your neighbor? Is everyone your neighbor? How are you going to treat them? Now, there's all kinds of ways we can go political here. I'm not going to do that. I'm saying to you, though, who's your neighbor and how you're going to treat them? That's the fine print. You're going to be in heaven. I don't have any question about that. But while you're here on earth, you got to love God. And we better, by God, figure out how to love our neighbors. That seems like enough.